Hey, and welcome back to the Fitness Nerds podcast. This is your co host, Ryan Smith, and we're here on a special interview day. Just wanted to take a moment and introduce our special guest. His name is Dom D'Agostino. Is I pronounce that correct?
That's right.
All
Yep.
right.
Dominic. Dom. Yep. That's
Okay.
right.
And he's an expert on ketosis. So we've talked about this in some of the previous podcasts, but it's on ketosis and metabolic therapies. He networks with a lot of people in the fitness community, whether it be endurance athletes, bodybuilding. He's been on a bunch of podcasts as well, but he's presented at TEDx, and later this year he'll also be presenting at the Dave Asprey Bulletproof Conference in September. And I guess he kind of got into ketosis originally looking at it from a nutritional standpoint from dealing with seizures from the Charlie Foundation, right?
Yeah, that sparked my interest in this journey.
Okay.
And looking at nutritional ketosis and ways to produce that without necessarily the extreme carbohydrate restriction.
Right. And if I am remembering correctly, as far as the Charlie Foundation, that comes out of the military and deals with divers and SEALs and things. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an Office of Navy Research funded project, and the idea behind that project or the goal is to develop a mitigation strategy for what's called CNS oxygen toxicity, or toxicity in the central nervous system from breathing oxygen at hyperbaric pressure, which they do with a closed circuit rebreather.
Right.
It's an advanced kind of diving system. Has many advantages, but one major disadvantage is the oxygen toxicity. So there's no way to predict it or prevent it. So the nutritional ketosis appears to be the most effective way to prevent these types of seizures. And if we can produce that with a supplement, which we are working on now and got some good results on, that can be a breakthrough for that, but also have applications for many other things, especially in the performance field. Because ketones, they do function as an alternative fuel and can have the potential to enhance exercise performance and cognitive performance too.
Very cool. And that's definitely, I know, an area that we want to talk to. And obviously, you don't get much more higher performing individuals than Navy SEALs and, all a lot of the elite level military soldiers. So very cool.
That's
So,
right. Mm-hmm.
and I guess that kind of then plays over into our world of athletes, which I know you kind of consult with and delve into as well. And then I guess I didn't really mention it there, but I guess your main by day job is that you're an assistant professor at the University of Southern Florida, right?
South Florida,
South
yep.
Florida. Okay.
Yep. The College of Medicine here, Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology. So
It's a mouthful.
representing my department. Yeah, so I come from more of a pharmacology-based background, but I understood early on, really, that nutrition is, kind of the best medicine, and it can have major advantages over drug-based therapies. So I'm looking at ways to exploit that through nutrition exclusively, but also supplementation, specific types of supplementation that can, work through a metabolic mechanism.
All right. So I guess from a diving in what really is ketosis then, and
Yeah.
some of our people that are more unaware of what true ketosis is, they've heard paleo diet, they've heard the Atkins diet, they've heard all these different things. So what really is ketosis within the human body, I guess?
Yeah, so the most basic form that we've probably evolved to is starvation ketosis, or prolonged fasting, which undoubtedly occurred throughout the evolution of the human species, and so there was probably periods, and there are nowadays, where there's an absence of food, and our brain, in a typical diet, our brain relies almost 100% off glucose. And if that glucose is not available through the food supply, we start mobilizing fatty acids for fuel from our body. And those fats are an incredible energy source that we can, are great for performance athletes, endurance athletes. But fatty acids don't readily cross the blood-brain barrier very well. So our body converts these fatty acids to ketone molecules, and you can think of them as more or less like water-soluble fat molecules.
Okay.
It's, a little more complicated than that, but the advantage is that they can cross the blood-brain barrier, and they feed our brain energy, a super fuel, if you will, a very energetically dense source of energy that our heart can function optimally off too, and our muscles. So that would be fasting level or prolonged fasting or starvation ketosis, and it has many advantages for the species. Mm-hmm. The ketogenic diet restricts carbohydrates and mimics many aspects of fasting, and it mimics the effect of supplying the brain with ketones as an energy source.
Okay.
And by doing that, it has a neuroprotective effect, but it also can enhance brain energy metabolism, we think. So nutritional ketosis can only be achieved with really strict carbohydrate restriction,
okay,
and a high-fat diet. So there are drawbacks to this kind of diet, which produces a lifestyle that's kind of inflexible.
Mm-hmm.
In looking at the literature, no one will disagree, even a neurologist, that the ketogenic diet is effective when most drugs fail. So it seems to be one of the most effective things out there for seizures, even seizures from a variety of different etiologies. I'm interested in producing nutritional ketosis, and by definition, ketosis is an elevation of blood ketones, which may not be achieved with a paleo diet because carbohydrates may not be restricted enough. And the Atkins diet typically has too much protein in it to achieve what is known as therapeutic ketosis.
Okay.
In some cases, a modified Atkins actually can be very effective for seizure control.
Okay.
I'm interested in being able to produce ketosis independent of macronutrient composition of the diet. So you take a supplement. The idea that I had originally was a war fighter could take a supplement and within 10-15 minutes be in a level of ketosis that would take 24 to 48 hours to achieve.
Oh, okay.
And so to develop something like that, and then the person would stay into nutritional ketosis for hours on end, and throughout the duration of the mission, whether it be diving or what have you. And that this would not only prevent seizures, but would optimize the warfighter's performance, and we're mostly talking about Navy SEALs because they use a closed-circuit rebreather,
right.
Would optimize their physical performance as far as, energy output and energy efficiency, and also their cognitive performance. And being able to maintain that performance under environmental extremes. And this could be the hyperbaric environment, the undersea environment, a hypobaric hypoxia environment at altitude. Many of these guys have to go up into the hills and fight against people who are already acclimated to the hypoxia of the altitude. And just under periods of where food is not available to them.
Right.
Carbohydrate-based diet, if you lack food for after 10, 12 hours, you get really hungry and your performance goes down sharply.
Right.
If your body is adapted to ketones and fat adapted, that performance can be maintained. So exploiting the body's ability to use fatty acids and ketones as a source of energy has major advantages for U.S. military personnel, especially special ops guys. And I think that, only in the recent years has kind of the performance guys like you caught on to this and say, wow, this is something that we can exploit. We can biohack this technology or these ideas even, and to our advantage in the field. And that's become an area of interest to many people who are really pushing the limits in performance.
Yeah. So if we look at, and I know there's lots of those. So Jeff Volek is obviously a big name in the in the high fat, the low carbohydrate type of training for endurance athletes, as well as Bob Seebahar and all. There's lots of them that are out there. That familiar with and have talked to a lot of them. Obviously with Ben, you've been on Ben's podcast as well who did an Ironman on almost strictly in ketosis in a 9-hour Ironman. So pretty amazing results in a ketotic state.
Yeah.
So so I can definitely see where the the correlation comes from military on into our coming into our endurance and I guess not even just endurance, but really any sports platform.
Yeah, and I think from a ketosis point of view, we're doing some studies with resistance trainers now, and I don't want to kind of give away all the results, but with high intensity training, like a Wingate test or bodybuilding or powerlifting type things, I think carbohydrates can be leveraged, if you will, in this scenario where you're probably familiar with Kiefer's carb backloading sort of thing. And I think these things can be done, minimal amount of carbohydrates can be consumed in and around the workout to take advantage of the anti-catabolic and anabolic properties of insulin. So when I'm talking about carb backloading, I'm talking about, 25, 50 grams of carbs. I think, and depending on the output of the athlete, that can be done. And they can be in ketosis throughout the next day and just add carbs in around intra-workout or immediately after. So we're interested in doing some of these studies too. But when it comes to endurance, marathons, triathletes, runners, being in a state of ketosis offers many advantages, I think. And for bodybuilding, obviously, the body composition alterations with ketosis cannot be denied. And fatty acid oxidation is much higher.
Sure.
And that's been shown in many studies.
Right.
So you can, and fat is more satiating, and the advantage, when you're in a situation where you have to lose body weight, if you need to make a certain weight for wrestling or some kind of performance event, even powerlifting, the ketogenic diet is probably superior for the retention of your strength and muscle than a calorie-restricted carbohydrate-based diet. That is my opinion. I think many people argue this or debate this, but that's my opinion from guys that I've worked with, and I think the science, in a couple months, the science will also support that.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, I've always used the analogy with people of that, you can't, with severe caloric restriction, it's like, trying to drive from where I am here in the Cincinnati area out to California on a half a tank of gas, right? It's just not going to happen. You're going to run out of energy at some point in time if you're just loading up with those carbs or just, completely, out of energy. And whenever you've got that, and I've heard it said that even some of the leanest athletes still carry that 30 to 40,000 calories. Although I'm not a fan of the whole calorie counting thing, there's still a lot of fat that's within our body for us to be able to utilize for a long endurance period.
Yeah, I'm kind of as a scientist, I like numbers.
Sure.
So counting, grams of macronutrients and adjusting ratios and things, and putting in the numbers in something like MyFitnessPal or whatever is a good way to understand your body, and our calorie needs can vary day to day. Even doing the same thing. I mean, your body weight can fluctuate. On some days, I'm just running hot. On other days, I feel like your body has rhythms that we don't fully understand yet, and it's something that I'm interested in understanding. But some people are kind of like, don't count calories at all, and other people are like, you need to count every macronutrient, gram of macronutrient. I'm somewhere in between. I think you need a rough estimate to really get a handle on what works best for you and understanding your physiology.
Yeah, and I can definitely agree, but there's also, just the normal law of thermodynamics that most people try to claim with the human body just doesn't work. There's so much from a micronutrient, from a mitochondrial, from so many different aspects of the body that, what the brain uses and what the body uses it just doesn't equate out like most people think that it does.
You could take two people that are almost identical on paper and have one person on a diet that's tolerating, 400 grams of carbs, no problem, and another person who just becomes insulin resistant off like 100 grams of carbs a day.
Right. Yeah.
Like it varies. I've seen it, and they're like visually identical people as far as body composition and performance and things like that. So there are these genetic variations in our ability to, in our metabolism that we need to appreciate and understand. And through self-experimentation, I think it's the best way.
Yeah, and it truly is an N=1 experiment for each one of us, I think.
Yep.
So that's where the research, we've got to have large numbers for research to prove that something is working, but at the same time is what's working for you on an individual basis, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think it's where there's a lot of disparaging comments about the ketogenic diets and paleo or the low carb, high fat. So I guess, there's all those different types of diets. So what would you kind of say what is the difference between just a ketogenic diet, a low carb, high fat diet, and a paleo type diet?
Okay. Well, I define a ketogenic diet, if you're going to use the term, if someone says they're on a ketogenic diet, people will tell me I'm on a ketogenic diet and it just didn't work. I felt like crap or whatever. And I asked them, did you measure ketones? And they almost always didn't measure ketones.
Right.
So a ketogenic diet is by definition one that elevates and sustains, ketone levels. And the best way to do that is with a blood meter, like a little meter I have here, or, experimenting with this Ketonics unit here that measures breath acetone.
Okay.
And I'm actually, kind of conversing with the guy who created that system, and he's modifying it in a way that it's starting to become semi-quantitative and more quantitative, and I think it could be a useful, non-invasive method to monitor you on a ketogenic diet. And so staying in ketosis, you then get the benefits of the ketogenic diet. Now with a low-carb diet, doesn't necessarily keep you in ketosis because many people find that they overeat protein, and protein can kick you out of ketosis. And protein can also release insulin, which causes hypoglycemia. And if you're hypoglycemic without elevated ketones, you're going to get hungry, and you're going to kind of have fluctuations in your energy and your mood and things like that. So stabilizing your energy levels and your brain metabolism, keeping your brain happy, is a lot easier to do if you maintain your ketone levels high. And keep not high, I mean 1 millimolar, is basically high, and you can measure that with a blood test.
Right.
It will make dieting much easier. And it's also an indication, your ketone levels are an indication that you're oxidizing fat for fuel. And that's probably the most important thing, whether you're trying to change your body composition, and most people are trying to lose fat, or you're trying to maximize your ability to oxidize fatty acids for an endurance event. So if you stay in ketosis, you're essentially kicking on a genetic program, if you will, in your body that's producing epigenetic changes over time that's maximizing your body's ability to derive energy from fat. And in Jeff Volek's work, he puts people on treadmills and looks at their respiratory quotient, and fatty acid oxidation is literally off the charts. It's like beyond anything ever recorded. Now, a paleo diet largely, never achieves that unless they're really training, very hard. Prolonged training will produce exercise-induced ketosis, which basically depletes your carbohydrate stores, glycogen, and you have this post-exercise ketosis. A lot of guys report to me that they do get into ketosis and they restrict carbohydrates enough. So it all comes down to the level of carbohydrate restriction and to some degree protein. You need to moderate protein to do that. And it's like, well, what are you going to eat? You got to eat fat. You got to increase fat until at least 50% of your calories should be coming from fat. Upwards, I mean, my intake is about 75 to 80% of my calories are from fat. And that makes me feel good. I haven't eaten anything since breakfast, so we're going on like 10 hours here, and I have plenty of energy. And that would have that's not even a possibility on a carbohydrate-based diet. When you get hungry on a carb-based diet, it's almost like a crisis. Like you start looking for food, you get irritable, I got to eat. And I don't like that feeling. So I like.
Absolutely, and I'm the same way. So I'm a big fan of. I drink bulletproof coffee pretty much every single morning. So I've got the brain octane. So I'm using the MCT. So that type of where I just don't get hungry, and it's just I feel great, and it's like I'll go till 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon before I'm eating anything again, and it's kind of like, well, I can eat. I'm not starving typically. Now, if I know if I eat something that's higher in carbs, then it's like 2 hours later, I'm going, oh my God, I'm just, I just can't get enough. It's like, I just want to keep eating and eating and eating.
Yeah, you get hungry. Yep.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned that 75, 80, so a lot of times I'll be talking with people about, trying to get their fat up there as far as that, 70 to 80% as well whenever I'm working with clients. And obviously this is such a paradigm shift for them, where most of them they just can't even imagine having fat, and they don't understand how good quality fats they don't make you fat, and it's actually allows us to use fat more. So I guess from that standpoint, how do you work with people, and how do you talk to people about, hey, this is such a paradigm shift, but this is really the way you need to, that would be a good way for you to burn fats and kind of take over?
Well, in my approach is send them research papers, but that doesn't always work with people.
Right.
I make it mandatory reading for my students to read, like Jeff Volek's The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. I think that's good. I will send them links to different websites that I think are helpful. Ketogenic Diet Resource by Ellen Davis is a great place to get started, just some basic understanding of the ketogenic diet. But and they'll have to take the time to understand, the benefits, and it's definitely flies in the face of what many people are taught.
Right.
So therein lies the problem. But in a way, being a ketogenic diet researcher, it almost makes it fun, I guess, in a way, because you are stepping outside the box, and you have to. It sharpens your intellect in a way, because you have to defend yourself. I have to defend myself to do the kind of research I'm doing.
Right.
Using a high-fat diet, to metabolically manage cancer or seizures or something like that. And I feel, when I present to a mainstream conventional clinicians or whatever, a lot of hands go up after my talk and be like, well, you're managing seizures, but you're going to give the person a heart attack. And, I get comments like this. So I have to direct them to the literature. And I think there are a lot of good resources out there. And I put some of them on a website, ketonutrition.org. It's just a very basic website that I compile information on. But a lot of good books to get started. Keto Clarity is a book that's put out by Jimmy Moore, and I recently contributed to that. I think that's I just read it, actually, and I contributed some quotes to it, and in a recent travel, I took it with me and read the book, and I thought, wow, this is a great resource, this Keto Clarity book. It's also by Eric Westman from Duke University. Put together a great guide. I mean, you can read it in like 2-3 hours, no problem, and it gives you a firm foundation of the benefits of ketosis, from weight loss to, diseases to performance, and it covers a lot. It covers a lot of territory.
Right. Yeah.
So giving a person something like this, something that's reader friendly, or in layman's terms, can really make an impact. And then if they're curious enough, they'll delve into it a little bit more. And if you convince them, hey, you can eat fat, you can have butter, you can have, I make keto ice cream, and I have sour cream, and sugar-free dark chocolate. These are all things that I eat, and bacon even. And if you I sell it like that. I was like, well, this is what I eat. This is my blood work before. I've been able to essentially retain my strength and most of my muscle, and even off low calories. And I have a lot of energy. So the main thing is that if you have a lot of energy, that's a good index that what you're doing is working. And if people have poor energy throughout the day, then I would question whatever nutritional methodology they've adopted and are using. So
exactly. I mean, if you look at the nutrition mentality of our country and look what it's done for us, right? So,
yeah,
and I'm sure that in many ways you're obviously not popular with the pharmaceutical world as well, because here we are taking care of things from a nutritional standpoint, which is really kind of, I think the way we should take care of our health anyway is let's prevent things versus put the band-aids on them after we've already got there. But they're also in the business of making money, and you're in the business of researching the truth.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. If they came out with a drug that cured cancer, there'd be a lot of unhappy people. Major universities would lose millions, if not billions, of dollars, and a lot of people would be out of jobs. So it's sort of an industry. I'm not going to challenge that industry. I think there are certain cancers even that respond quite well to like blood cancers and lymphomas and things like that. But I've gotten some pushback, from pharmaceutical-based researchers that see what I'm doing, and I just think it's important to do the research and get the information out there. And patients, whether they be a type 2 diabetes patient or seizure patient or cancer patient, they just understand that it's a viable alternative, or that science has shown that this is a viable therapeutic option, that they should be given, that option. Their doctor should acknowledge this, and that's the therapeutic, especially if the side effect profile is really low or non-existent. So, and I think one way to sell it is that you could say, hey, this could enhance the efficacy or act as an adjuvant to an existing pharmacological therapy. So it may help the therapy, work better, do its intended thing by putting the body into a more sensitive state.
Sure. And then, so how does, I guess, nutritional quality come into play with a ketogenic diet, though, too?
Yeah, that's another area of debate, with GMO foods and, grass-fed beef versus, corn-fed. And I always go, I grew up farming. So I grew up actually growing the Monsanto, products. And so I have an appreciation for organic farming and using natural approaches to farming, because I know it's more difficult and it's more costly, and I try to choose options in that direction. I'm not kind of super fanatical, but I do go out of my way to buy more grass-fed, natural type products, grass-fed butter, things like that. I tell people that to do it because it's food quality is really important. The fatty acid profile of the meat or eggs that you're eating is largely determined by what the animal ate. And what the animal ate is eating is largely dependent upon the conditions that it's maintained in. And I think from an ethical standpoint, we have an obligation to choose products that are, to the best we can, choose products, meat products from animals that were raised in the most ethically, if we're going to eat products. Yeah. So I do get,
let them be as natural as possible.
Vegans that contact me, they want to do the ketogenic diet, and I really have an appreciation for the vegan lifestyle, but vegans, I get some vegans try to turn me on to that lifestyle too, and they kind of defend it, in a way, and I can appreciate that. But I'm moving more into that direction and eating less meat, and kind of shifted away from meat and eating mostly fish, actually a lot of fish, and erring towards plant-based proteins, and actually looking into things like insect proteins, which are something that I'm interested in. So just to answer your question, I think people do need to acknowledge where their food is coming from, and should make, choices to pick the food that has the highest nutrient profile, and we're kind of done through farming methods that are more sustainable. I can tell you from coming from an industrialized farming background, the farming methods now are not going to be sustainable. I mean, with the amount of herbicides and pesticides and the things that were done, even when I was farming.
I grew up in an area the same way here in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And I grew up on a
Kentucky,
horse
yeah.
farm, but at the same time as all of my neighbors, they've raised farm and tobacco and everything else, and there's corn and soy and everything all around us, and it's just knowing what goes on in nature versus what's going on in our society now too. So I think there's definitely some major things that we need to look at and just use some logic.
Yeah, buying locally produced, is really good, and just doing some research and finding out, how, where does your food come from?
Right.
Look to see where your food comes from, and make the choice to buy locally. And if everyone did that, then that would make a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Really. I mean, I just saw on the news that we're growing chickens here. We're thinking about sending them to China to get packaged, and then China sends them back here to be sold.
Yeah.
So we're outsourcing the pack. We're growing the chickens here and actually literally sending them to China and then back here to sell them. Does that make sense at all?
Makes none.
I thought it was a joke. Actually, someone told me, and I looked it up. And
it's
things
crazy.
are really happening.
Yeah, and and really, I guess going into that, and this was a little, I guess, off topic from where I was going, but then talking about, I guess, the gut biome. So so when we're looking at where we are locally, so my co-host who's in Arizona, she's going to have a different gut biome typically than I am here in Kentucky and Cincinnati area. So what even locally grown there is not, even if it's, whatever, if it's kale that was grown there versus kale that's grown here, is going to be completely different, which probably is not going to be out there based upon their climate and stuff. So, to me, our biome and our gut biome is a product of where we are, but it's kind of gotten out of place because now we've got products that are, you can get avocados all year round because they're sent from all over the world or whatever it is, and it's, I guess our gut biome is kind of now just from everywhere.
Yeah, that's a hot topic and something that we're interested in. And I know the gut biome can differ between rodents and humans, but we're going to look at the gut biome in our rodent studies. There was a couple papers came out, and the ketogenic diet kind of produces a favorable shift in the gut flora that could be, thought to be beneficial. And there's, I know, a number of journals that are recently starting up. The gut biome brain connection, and there's a couple gut biome journals that are coming. It's a hot topic, and I think it needs to be further explored and investigated. I know the military is actually interested in this, too, because even as it relates to psychological health. My understanding is that the ketogenic diet produces favorable shifts in the gut biome as far as producing more helpful bacteria, and that is the ketogenic diet is pretty high in probiotics, or in fiber, can be high in fiber, and a well-constructed ketogenic diet, and I think that can aid the person in producing and maintaining the gut flora that optimizes gut health, from my perspective. And I feel like since I've weaned myself off, and this goes back years ago, wheat-based products or carbohydrate-based products, my gut health has been remarkably well. I've had no gut issues, no GI issues at all. Yeah. And I did, growing up, I did on a high-carb diet, even had issues like inflammatory issues like eczema that completely went away when I shifted away from eating primarily mostly pasta and bread.
Right. Yeah. So. Same here. And yeah, I've dealt with that growing up the same way. And yeah, it's major changes, just how you feel, how everything. It's like I feel now at 46 a whole lot younger than I actually am. I actually feel younger now than I did even 10 years ago.
Yeah. So, but, you look it too. You look 46.
Well, thanks. Appreciate that. So, and I know we're going a little bit longer here than I originally planned, but I've got a few more questions here. If you've got a few minutes to kind of go over it. Yeah. So, so whenever we're talking about with the ketogenic diet, there's, I guess, one of the big things that everybody talks about is, I feel like crap for a while, or it's like I just lose all my energy and stuff. So, really, how long does it kind of take before you start seeing those kind of those things go away, but then also how long does it take to kind of get into a lot of the majority of the benefits of a ketogenic diet?
Mm-hmm. You get benefits almost within the first 24 hours. I mean, just measure glucose. Take someone with type 2 diabetes, restrict their carbohydrates. On Monday and Tuesday, their glucose levels are going to be improved, no doubt. And that's going to produce physiological effects that are positive. So you start getting benefits almost immediately. Most people do. And then you get side effects. You have what I'd say glucose withdrawal in the brain. Your brain is craving glucose. And it takes a while to upregulate the mechanisms for your body's ability to produce ketone, to transport ketones, and also to metabolically derive energy from ketones. This is a process, and Jeff Bolt calls it keto adaptation, and I think that's a good term, that occurs over weeks to months. And I think that there was recently a study, I think, in off-road cyclists that were on the diet for 4 weeks. And I would like to see the same study done over 4 months and even a year, because from my personal experience and from people that I've witnessed who have transitioned to this way of eating, they continue to derive more benefits from the ketogenic diet the longer they're on it. So you have the benefit of getting results immediately and then dealing with some uncomfortable side effects that I think can be largely mitigated by adding things like MCT oil or ketone supplements. Keto Force is a product by Prototype Nutrition that I would recommend. It's essentially a pure ketone salt that can be consumed, added to MCT or mixed in various ways to be palatable, and that can help with the brain fog the first 2-3 weeks, and after that, I think it can be used sparingly. You can use it to enhance your exercise performance, and that can help. But I think making sure that the fat content is high too. So in the beginning, ensuring a lot of people are just scared to eat that much fat.
Right.
But I think you got to transition and just make sure you're getting the fat, because the fat is what's going to make the ketones. Your body fat makes ketones too, but I think it's better to nutritionally add it into the diet and ensure carbohydrates are low enough to convert that. And it's a process though. But I'd like to emphasize that the longer you stay in ketosis, the more benefits you derive from it.
Okay.
So that's an important take-home message. So when people say they tried the ketogenic diet and it didn't work, they're like, I did 2 or 3 weeks and I just couldn't tolerate it, but they didn't check ketones with a meter like this, and they didn't even check urine ketones. So they just tried a low carbohydrate diet, which was probably a low carb, high protein diet, which made them hypoglycemic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and I have one of the blood meters myself, and then the urine sticks. How accurate are they compared to So if somebody's wanting just a general test, they want to see there versus going and buying a meter or whatnot.
Yeah, that's a good question. What I tell people is that if I tell people to get the blood ketometer, because that's very useful, but to use the cheap sticks that you can get for $10 buys you 100 or so at the nearest Walgreens or CVS. And start the ketogenic diet, and once you start getting measurements on those sticks that you're in ketosis, then you can start using the blood ketone meter, and then you'll start getting some numbers. Otherwise, if you're just experimenting right off the bat and start checking your blood, you're using a lot of money there. They range from $2 to $6 per strip. So I would confirm that you're in ketosis first with the urine ketone strips, and then start checking blood. You might want to do it once every week or twice a week. So every Monday or whatever, you check and you do it at the same time. You tend to get lower ketones in the morning, and ketone levels, if you maintain the same kind of eating pattern throughout the day, ketone levels will sort of peak towards the night. In the morning, cortisol tends to be higher, and that tends to stimulate gluconeogenesis. So you have it can kick you out of ketosis. Okay. So just keep that in mind. I like to check mine in the middle of the afternoon. Usually now between 4 o'clock and 8 p.m. is when I'm really starting to hit high ketone levels. I just did a breath acetone, and I'm in moderate ketosis right now. I'm about 2.5 millimolar of ketones right now.
Okay, cool. And so I guess with looking at this as far as from a high intensity, from an exercise perspective, since that's a lot of our audience here as well, what are we looking at from like a thyroid function? What are we looking at from, the ramping up time frame, getting used to being in ketosis and exercise and, the high intensity interval training, what type of things like that? And, maybe even hormone production?
Yeah. So a question I get is, will this screw up my hormones? Mm-hmm. What kind of exercise should I do, or will my high intensity exercise be impaired by restricting carbohydrates? These are all good questions, and I think it comes down to the individual, and it really needs to experiment. But I can tell you what feedback and research has told me, that the longer you're in ketosis, the better you're able to exploit ketones as fuel for exercise, including high intensity exercise. If I was like an MMA fighter or a sprinter or I don't know, let me think, just even a mountain biker where you have really hard bouts of high intensity, my approach would be to maintain a ketogenic diet and use glucose or carbohydrates as an alternative fuel intra-workout or after workout. So in low to moderate amounts, 25, 50, maybe 100 grams of carbs spread out throughout the event. But by staying in ketosis, you're forcing your body to really effectively oxidize fatty acids for fuel. And I think there's major advantages to that. In regards to hormone production, and I get this a lot, and it's kind of difficult for me to answer because people will say, well, I did occasionally, Ben Greenfield was actually one, and his thyroid get messed up, he said, and a couple other people, and I asked them, what are they doing? And they're at the peak of their training, for one thing. So my opinion is that these individuals are overtraining, grossly overtraining, and they're calorie restricted. So even if they're in ketosis, calorie restriction will start to push your thyroid levels down. And overtraining is a surefire way to decrease your thyroid. Right. So what does this do? This makes you more metabolically efficient. So it allows you to conserve energy. An evolutionarily hardwired system is put into play. So these are metabolic adaptations that can be favorable for our system as a whole. One way to mitigate this problem, I think, would be to ensure that we're getting enough calories, calorie restriction, and to periodize the training in a way that prevents overtraining. So work with a good person who can program your training, who knows your body, who can avoid the overtraining syndrome. One of them would be hormone suppression of thyroid and I think it's important to acknowledge too that these are things that happen, with elite athletes. I think even Jeff Volek was telling me, we just met recently, he's basically most of his guys that are in the study, and other people have told me this too, that their testosterone is suppressed, to hypogonadal levels, and that's interesting since some of them are very, very muscular guys, and their testosterone is like pushed through the floor. They're really low. But I think also what's going on is that exercise enhances androgen receptor density on the surface of your muscle. So a little bit of testosterone, your body is very sensitive to that. So, the level of testosterone that could preserve and maintain 200 pounds guy of lean body mass, is much less in someone who's trained than someone who's sedentary, because their sensitivity to anabolic hormones, including insulin, IGF-1 and testosterone, are much higher, being in a trained state. That's thunder, by the way. I don't know if you could hear that. So in Tampa, it's like World War III at 4 o'clock every PM, because we get more lightning strikes than any place on the planet, I think. But anyway,
it's crazy.
So that's if you hear a lot of noise in the background, daily thunderstorms we get. So that's my thoughts on that.
Okay.
People who say they have thyroid issues need to look at their overall calorie and make sure they're getting lots of fat in their diet,
Mm-hmm.
and also ensure that they're not overtraining. And almost every single person that has come to me with thyroid issues, they are under eating,
Mm-hmm.
they're not getting enough fat in, and they're overtraining, in my opinion. Now, with that said, a little bit of carbohydrates intra-workout,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a way, if they're going to continue restricting their calories and overtraining, a little bit of carbohydrates intra-workout may be a way to mitigate some of the effects. So by increasing insulin, yeah.
So have you looked at like some of those? Obviously one of the big hot topics now in the industry is resistant starch, and I've used the Generation UCAN with,
Mm-hmm.
obviously Bob Seebahar and Jeff Volek, and everybody's been involved with the Generation UCAN, which is that, uh, that high molecular weight, low osmolality type of
Yeah.
carbohydrate that kind of titrates that carbs into your system, allows you to stay in there. And then obviously, I guess the longer you're in ketosis, the more carbohydrates you can stand, and you don't necessarily, or it's not going to kick you out as much, depending on the type of. I mean, if you're using other things like MCT and all the
Yeah.
other things, it'll kind of mitigate some of those carbohydrates you take into.
I think there's advantages to that. What I would recommend is that a person train in nutritional ketosis to optimize their body's ability to oxidize fat, and not to train with these things. But to do a couple experimental runs prior to the main event, if they're training for a particular event, to use the resistant starch, the UCAN products, or even ketone supplementation,
Mm-hmm.
to understand, how it works. But if they're using these things on a daily basis during their training, they're not going, and I've done this, the UCAN products and the resistant starch, they're going to maintain a level of ketosis that's not optimal.
Okay.
And so I would, set up your training so you're going like 2-3 months, staying in ketosis, and 6 weeks leading up to it, do a couple trial runs on the weekend or whenever you do, to assess your body's ability to use these things as alternative fuel to the ketone and fatty acids. And I think you start low, 25, 50 grams
Mm-hmm.
of the resistant starch, and then kind of work up from there.
Okay.
That's what I would recommend. And MCT too. You don't want to do a trial run of MCT on the day you're running a marathon, because a lot of people have violent GI reactions to MCT. And even the Keto Force product out there can cause some GI issues. So it's important to. Now that product, I think, from my experience, the more I take it, the better my ability to kind of digest the ketones and use them. I create a higher tolerance by using it over time. So
cool. So we'll put a link to that kind of in the show notes and stuff as well, well as kind of some of the other stuff, as well as your website that we talked about. And I obviously want to be respectful of your time, but this has all been great information, and it's like I could sit here and talk about this for hours. Since that's also your topic, I'm sure you could as well.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of finish up here, as far as for somebody who's looking at investigating, getting into a ketogenic diet, actually for just their daily performance, for fat loss, for just overall mental performance, however you want to look at it, for overall health, not necessarily they're even training at somebody, what would you say is the kind of the best way for them to get started?
I would recommend the books that I mentioned previously, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living, and The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. I would tell them to, if they're interested in the ketogenic diet, to check out the Ketogenic Diet Resource.
Okay.
I think that's a great, it was actually, I found that early on and it continues to be one of the best resources out there. And just to self-experiment, to go buy some urine ketone strips and get a blood ketone meter and honestly assess, how you feel in the ketogenic diet, and give it some time. So let the diet, let ketosis do its thing, and keep in mind that you're forcing your body to physiologically change from a carbohydrate-based metabolism, if that's what you eat, to fatty acid and ketone metabolism. And it's not something that occurs overnight. It's something that occurs over weeks to months, and the longer you do it, the more benefits you derive from it. Okay. So that needs to be understood and appreciated as you embark in this process.
Right. Well, great. Well, I appreciate it. And then if you can just one more time here, kind of repeat how they might be able to get in touch with you as far as from your website. What was your website again?
Yeah, it's not. It's a website that I just compile information on, and there's also some. There's doctors there who understand how to use this approach for therapeutic purposes, and there's also consultants on there, and some books that are on there. So ketonutrition.org.
Okay.
I guess Facebook. I have a Facebook. I keep kind of active. I always post something on there pretty much every day. Usually research related or science related. And I think my faculty profile. You can put a link in the show notes on that, and then that has kind of my email and contact information.
Great.
And the research that I'm doing. Is also on there. And publications, that sort of thing.
Wonderful. Well, I definitely appreciate the time that you took here with us today and going over it. This is great information, and I know I'd be happy to. I'm looking forward to getting this podcast out there. We'll probably have it out there later today or tomorrow, so it'd be great. I really appreciate it. Any last things as far as that you can think of that I may have missed on or anything like that? I
think we hit a lot of topics.
I think so too.
I do think I'd like to put out that I've only been in this field for a short time, as a junior investigator, really intensely in the last maybe 3-4 years, and I've seen it expand rapidly. And I can predict that it's going to get more popular just based on the amount of science that's being done now and grants that are coming through and funding this kind of research, and it's almost always leading to a positive effect. So I think you're on the cutting edge. So you're giving your listeners information that that's really not going to become mainstream in about 4 or 5 years. So I think your listeners can really garner a lot of information from hopefully this, but the resources that I provided out there, and just doing a little searching on Google and just finding out more about the ketogenic diet, the benefits of it.
Very, very cool. I appreciate it. Yes, and I'll get the stuff up, and we will we'll kind of take it from there, and then maybe sometime if there's any new research or things like that, since we're friends on Facebook, maybe we can also at some point in time do a little bit of a follow up or something from there. Then
that would be great.
All right. Well,
thanks for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So until then, I guess on the Fitness Nerds podcast, you can find us over at facebook.com/fitnessnerdspodcast, our website, fitnessnerdspodcast.com. So we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Dom.
Thanks, Ryan.